Changes are not always just new beginnings. Sometimes they carry shadows that weigh on the soul of those who live them. Jane, at 15, experienced this pain in body and spirit during a transition that seemed promising, an invitation to a party at her new school, a chance to make friends and fit in. But what began as a moment of hope soon proved to be a trap for a silent nightmare. If you've ever felt that a situation was more dangerous than it seemed, that the strange was lurking disguised as normal, share your experience. Subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss stories that warn and transform. Jane came from a simple family that had moved several times because of her father's job. The new city was a whirlwind of faces and expectations. The unexpected invitation from a classmate at the private school to a party should have been an opportunity for Jane to find her place. Upon arriving, she was greeted with smiles and kindness. The hostess made sure she felt included, offering her a cocktail prepared especially for her, supposedly non-alcoholic, respecting the limits set by her parents. Nothing seemed threatening that night, were it not for the strange taste of the liquid, the sudden sickness, and the moment Jane vomited, as if her body were rejecting something invisible. Without knowing it, that instinctive reflex was what saved her. Hours later, the world she knew fell apart in the panic of waking up alone, naked, and lost in a cabin on the edge of a dark forest. The awakening didn't come with violence, but with an absurd silence. The cabin had large windows that showed imposing trees, but that only increased the feeling of imprisonment. Her clothes were beside the table where Jane rested, a glimmer of hope in that improvised captivity. She wasn't tied up. She felt no pain, but she felt fear crawling in her mind. She quickly connected the dots: the drink, the sickness, the interrupted sleep. Someone had planned a ritual, a ceremony for which she was the victim. Desperate, Jane put on what she could and left through the open door, entering the woods and following a road that snaked through the trees. Fear pulsed like a drum in her chest. With every step, the weight of the escape increased. When the headlights of 3 cars appeared on the trail, instinct was her only recourse: to hide. She watched from a distance as that group approached the cabin, as if they were arriving for the consummation of the pact that almost destroyed her. Jane walked as far as her body would allow and, exhausted, arrived home the next morning. Her mother greeted her with tears, a mix of relief and horror. Unanswered phone calls, the empty party house at the scheduled time, absent cameras, and the police's clinical delay in opening a formal search increased the trauma. The family was torn between the fear of facing a powerful local elite and the desire to protect her at all costs. At school, the silence surrounding the party was even more painful. The hostess, who had planned everything, pretended not to know Jane, ignoring her until the end of the school year. The young woman lived for months in a paranoid state, restless, observing every gesture and shadow with fear of what might have escaped. With her father's relocation came the hope of a new beginning and the fear that the pact that almost consumed her would never be forgotten. Jane never knew what the ritual she was almost surrendered to would be. She never saw the faces of the others involved, nor heard the chanting that usually accompanies these dark ceremonies. What she knows is that her involuntary refusal, by vomiting the drink, was what changed her destiny. The feeling of escaping the right path haunts her to this day, as if an invisible thread could have pulled her into an abyss from which she would never return. In loose conversations, Jane admits to herself that it was immense luck not to have succumbed that night. Sometimes she thinks of the dozens of other girls who may not have had the same opportunity, and that adds to the weight of memory and survival. The power that manipulates and attracts people to those clandestine parties remains an enigma for Jane. She knows that money and prestige hide many faces, and that, for many families, the luminous appearance of elite education is nothing more than a disguise for dark plots. Naivety and hope were her lesser weapons in a game where the stakes were too high. She chose never to trust blindly again, and she wanders between shadows and lights, careful not to be seen as easy prey again, never to be part of a pact that is beyond control. Living after the trauma was another battle. Jane struggled to accept that happiness was possible despite what almost crushed her. The family, now more united, sought ways to protect one another, but the invisible mark of the pact remains. Time and distance helped, but the emotional scar still hurts. A constant reminder that sometimes danger is where you least expect it, and that naivety can be the greatest enemy. Fear turned into prudence, and prudence became strength. Jane learned to read between words and gestures, to detect the falsehood that hides under kindness. Night was no longer a time for partying, but for vigilance, an attentive gaze that saved her and now guides her life. She knows that her story is a silent warning, a call to alert anyone who might be too vulnerable, wanting to start over, but running the risk of being devoured in the darkness. This experience forged a different Jane, someone who no longer gives in to social pressures that often mask real dangers. The secret of what almost happened remains guarded, but the determination for life and truth has never been so alive. She follows her path, aware that fleeing the past is impossible, but that looking at her own story with courage can be liberating. Today, Jane tells few people what she experienced, knowing that some truths are much harder to carry than one imagines. She is a symbol for those who fight against the traps of appearances, of parties that shine on the outside and darken on the inside, and of the silent pact that forever changes a teenager's life. But above all, it is a reminder that resistance is possible, even in the face of the shadow of the night and the human predators who feed on it. If this story touched your heart, if you have ever felt the weight of a secret that can change everything, make your voice heard. Share in the comments, subscribe, and help spread warnings that can save lives. The fight against dark pacts and hidden manipulations begins when we give up silence and face the truth, even when it is painful.